Okay, well, good morning to everybody, and particularly good morning to Henry Smith, who is, of course, MP for Crawley. And we're delighted to have Henry with us this morning and for agreeing in what is no doubt a busy schedule to give us some time. I know Henry attaches a great deal of value to, to communicating, to talking to, and to hearing the views of business. So he's told me he doesn't want to speak for an hour because he wants to hear from all of us, all of you. So do have your questions ready. So the way it's going to run this morning is that Henry's going to say a few words to kick things off, and then it's going to be over to you to chip in. It doesn't have to be questions, it can be comments or topics, so it doesn't have to be a cutting question. Two ways of asking questions. You can stick your hand up, either physically or by going into participants. Understand if you click on participants at the bottom of your screen, there's a facility to stick up an electronic hand. So you can do that. So if you're happy just to ask the question in the usual way, that's fine. If you prefer to type the question and I'll read it out, then go into chat. Knowing most of you, I suspect you will want to ask the questions yourself, but if you'd rather do so via chat, then that's also great. Now, I've been told that this will work best if you go into speaker view rather than gallery view, but that is entirely up to you. But that is what I've been advised to do. We've still got a couple of people coming in as I speak, actually. So can I just see from nods of heads and smiles or whatever, is everybody happy with the way it's going to work? So I get some thumbs up. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nasser. Steve. Yeah, everybody looks quite relaxed. Jeremy's looking a bit tentative. He knows I'm going to pick on him, that's why. Okay, I am going to kick off. So again, Henry, welcome, good morning, and thank you. And over to you to say a few words of introduction.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much for that introduction, and very good morning to everybody. It's good to see people en masse. It's something I think we've been missing quite a bit. And can I start by paying tribute not only to Gatwick Diamond Business, but also all of your members for really sticking together and being a help to one another during what is, of course, absolutely unprecedented time for business, certainly I think in anyone's living memory. I've been very proud of the way that businesses large and small in the sub-region, in the Gatwick Diamond area, have really responded to the immense challenges that we have faced. I'll go very quickly through, obviously, the various numbers of schemes that have been announced early on when the pandemic, so the impact of the pandemic was really starting to be felt. You're all very familiar with those, but perhaps I can pick up any points if people have more nuanced questions after I've spoken. But obviously perhaps the biggest one of those has been the coronavirus job retention scheme, the furlough, which across the country over 8.5 million jobs have essentially been put on life support to bridge us over to the other side. And I imagine that many of your organizations have taken advantage of that. You'll know that the furlough has been extended until October, but there's a tapering of the HMRC support from the current 80% now. It will be 70% in September and 60% in October. There's also been, for the self-employed, slightly more tricky, and there have been more issues with this that I've certainly come across from local self-employed people. The self-employed coronavirus scheme, 70% of trading profits. The big issue there has been people who haven't been able to prove their previous 3 years trading profits, which has been, for the smaller traders, perhaps has been a particular issue. There's been 18.5 billion pounds of bounce back loans that have already been announced, and also the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme as well. And more recently, over 11.5 million pounds awarded to Crawley Borough Council. I know some of you extend beyond Crawley in the Gatwick Diamond area, but my parochial knowledge extends to the borough boundaries. It will be similar for Reigate and Banstead, and for Tandridge, and for Horsham and Mid Sussex and Mole Valley and so on. But 11.7 million pounds of discretionary loans, again, for particularly hospitality and smaller businesses. So that's a very quick run through. But one of the things I'm deeply conscious of is a Centres for Cities report that was published about 6 weeks ago now, which said that the Crawley economic area, so essentially the Gatwick Diamond, would be the worst affected anywhere in the United Kingdom. And that's obviously a very solemn and sober assessment, and Centres for Cities have certainly been a reliable source previously in terms of the research that they do. No surprise really as to why that is. The name is in the title, isn't it? Gatwick Diamond. We've got Gatwick at the very centre of our economy. And aviation, of course, was one of the first industries to take an almost immediate hit as people stopped travelling even before the restrictions came in, and will probably be one of the slowest industries to recover. And we've had, sadly, significant local companies like Virgin Atlantic, headquartered in Manor Royal, announcing around about a third reduction in their workforce. Similarly for British Airways, with quite a bit of controversy around that. But EasyJet, Norwegian affected as well. But of course, it's not just the sort of the well-known tail fin carriers that we are familiar with. Gatwick Airport itself. I was talking to the chief executive the other day, and he was saying that there was one day a couple of weeks ago when in a whole day they only had 23 passengers coming through the airport. That's not even half a EasyJet flight. So it is massive for the aviation industry. But of course, as you will all appreciate, the ripple effect out to the supply chain for aviation, but then also the broader economy. A lot of people have for many years spoken about the need for us to diversify our economy, not be so reliant on aviation, and that's absolutely right. And we've seen in the area pharmaceutical companies coming in, financial companies, consulting, retail, and others, but all of them end up having a knock-on effect by the significant reliance that our economy has on aviation. So in Parliament, that has been one of the principal areas I have been focusing on. Last week, I established a cross-party group called the Future of Aviation Group, and that is really there to lobby to make sure that the aviation and travel sectors, in the broadest possible context, receive that particular extra additional support in recognition of the fact that it took an immediate hit, and in recognition of the fact that it will take longer to come in. So where the government have done good things, like the furlough scheme, bounce back loans, discretionary grants, support for the self-employed, I welcome that, but I don't shy away in Parliament from criticising the government where I think they're getting it wrong. To be fair to them, they are dealing with an unprecedented situation, but they are wrong on, for example, the introduction, I believe anyway, for what it's worth, the introduction of the 14-day quarantine period, which starts on Monday. Had quarantine been the right thing for public health, I think that should have been introduced at the beginning of the lockdown restrictions, not as most of the rest of the world are coming out of them. That will only delay the pain for the aviation and travel sectors, and I criticised it in Parliament on Wednesday, and I have called for the earliest possible review of that, and other solutions such as air corridors, air bridges, which you might have heard about in terms of trying to get that industry going as well. But more broadly, what I've been seeking to do is really lobby on behalf of my corporate constituents. I've said this many times before. In the 10 years I've been Crawley's MP, that I'm there to lobby on behalf of my corporate constituents as much as my residential constituents, because you are the people, your organisations are the ones who employ the residents and, you know, in normal times mean that we have a very buoyant and healthy economy. I think we will come back, and I think we will come back strongly from the immense challenge that we have faced. But there are particular issues that our area face and need that extra support, and that's certainly what I will continue to be campaigning on. So with that, Jeff, I didn't want to take up too much time. I'd like to try and answer as many questions as possible, and no doubt there's a lot of things that I've missed in that brief introduction, but hopefully I can pick those up in response to queries from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. That's set the scene very well, you know, at the national and the local level. You mentioned the Centre for Cities Research. As Gatwick Diamond, as the Gatwick Diamond Initiative, our sort of sister organisation, we commissioned follow-up research from a company called Hatch Regeneris. And that goes into the impact on the Gatwick Diamond in more depth than the Centre for Cities. The big messages are the same. You know, we have, as a region, as a coastal capital region, we are one of the worst affected regions in the country, you know, right up there in the top 1 or 2, in fact. The reason being, of course, it's to do with the vulnerability of our employment base. So we have large important sectors that are major employers, like aviation, of course, and that means that a lot of jobs are vulnerable. You know, that's the only way you can put it at the moment, is vulnerable. And that's going to be a very big issue for us going forward. So, for example, if you look at Crawley, well, I say for example, actually, if you look at Crawley in particular, in Crawley, the report identifies, and this is consistent with other analysis, that something like 50% of Crawley jobs are at least at risk because of the sector makeup. And then outside of Crawley, if you look at areas, some of our areas like the Mole Valley, for example, are very heavily dependent on self-employed people. There's a disproportionate number of self-employed people, so they are at risk in a different way. So just to set the scene in terms of that sort of economic position, and really I'm aware, of course, because, you know, we're both involved with the economic task group set up with Crawley Borough Council, and you've written joint letters, I know, to government with Peter Lamb of Crawley. I have to say, and I think you'd actually agree with me, the response you got from government was rather general. I could have written it myself in my former civil servant days. So what do you feel the reaction from, what's your reaction to the way the government have responded in a way? I know it's early days and they're very much in crisis management mode, but pre-COVID, their focus was very much on the north in economic terms. Do you think we'll be able to get them to focus on the particular issues that we are now facing?
Well, I've been barking up that tree for many years. Before I was MP, when I was leader of West Sussex County Council, one of the things we did was commission an Oxford economics report into the importance of ensuring that the southeast economy is supported. I think it's only the southeast, eastern region and Greater London that are the net contributors both to the exchequer and the national economy. Every other region of the UK takes out. The report, which was about 12, 15 years ago now, was very much kind of the message is, you know, don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg, support the real sort of economic driver of the country as a whole. And I think that's been thrown into sharp relief. Certainly the experience of Crawley is, you know, 3 months ago, we had one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. And now, as you say, you know, prospect of half of the workforce not being in employment is truly shocking. And I think, you know, getting a recognition, you're right, a lot of the love has been about, well, let's build HS2 and connect with the north and regenerate the north and the northern powerhouse. not to mention devolved areas that still get an awful amount of UK government support, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. That is only possible largely from the wealth that's been generated by the Southeast, and we are very much a typical example of the heart of the sort of booming Southeast economy. So that message really does need to be heard by government, that unless there is support here, traditionally that perhaps wasn't needed as much, then actually that's going to have a real knock-on effect. And you know, I've been accused of being a bit sort of parochial when it comes to my support for aviation. Well, you would say that you've got Gatwick Airport within your constituency, but you know, we are a global island trading nation, and post-Brexit, that is even in sharper relief. That you know, our success historically has been by trading and traveling internationally, and if that isn't to come back, some estimates say perhaps not until 2023 to 2019 levels, then we're going to need some bridging support in the meantime. So one of the things I asked, I had a Prime Minister's question. I got quite lucky on Wednesday, actually. I had a Prime Minister's question as well. And one of the things I asked was an extension to furlough for aviation sector and travel sector employees, given the fact that, you know, just as most of the country in the world will be fully unlocked, we'll be actually going into the low season for aviation and travel anyway. So it might be another year before that sector can really start to pick up. So, you know, I'm doing what I can to lobby. As you say, there was a joint approach that was taken by myself and the leader of Crawley Borough Council, the sort of 10 asks that we had. I consider that response we got from the Department for Business to be very much a holding response. Those 10 points are being actively pursued. But also I've joined with, there's a group of MPs called the Gatwick Coordination Group, which is really again, I suppose the Gatwick Diamond Area MPs, who are usually quite critical of Gatwick. Actually wrote a very helpful letter, we jointly did, to the Chancellor about support, and also a combined letter that I've done with West Sussex County Council as well. So that and parliamentary questions and debates and keeping the pressure up is the best way that I personally can really make the case for the support that our area needs. But you know, please give me the evidence as well. It's very important, and your respective local members of Parliament, please give us the evidence to be able to make the case where it counts in Whitehall.
Well, thanks, Henry. I think that's very positive news that you've set up the cross-party aviation group, and also that you're looking to bring, you know, us the surrounding MPs with you, because as I was going to ask you about that, but I think you've already covered that. I think those who have doubted the role of Gatwick Airport as an economic driver, I think in a very painful way that we wish it hadn't happened, I think it's really bringing that home. Okay, so what I'd like to do now then is to open it up and invite questions, and I'd like to start off with one that we got advance warning of, and that's from Jeremy Taylor. I think yours is around director.
He didn't give me advance warning.
Well, no, morning all. Nice to see you, Henry. I'll cut your hair when it comes to good, when we can do that. How's everything going? I did actually write to Henry just a week or so ago about the issue is around directors' pay and directors' reimbursement, because obviously very welcome a lot of the schemes, the furlough, self-employed income support scheme, and various things that are going on, but there's a whole raft of business owners, SME directors, and I think you're obviously aware of the campaign about Forgotten Limited, and it's really just to get you on side, because in our own circumstance we've seen revenue of this small business, and I've sent you the figures in depth, but basically we're at about 32% of where we should be normally, and about 20% of where we were forecast to be across the past 3 months, with and it's difficult to say in front of a whole room full of people, but basically a very, very, very restricted pipeline across the next 3 months. Paid through directors' dividends, which is an efficient way of being paid, but we still pay corporation tax, VAT, and then we pay personal income tax on those dividends. So we do contribute. But at the moment, there doesn't appear to be anything for the millions of small business directors who are paid through dividends, which they only receive once they've made a profit. And it's just to get you on side for that campaign.
Well, as I hope you saw in my reply to your email last week, yes, I very much do support that. And I've made approaches to Rishi Sunak on that point. Essentially, over the last 6 weeks or so, what I've been dealing with on the sort of employer side of my inbox is dealing with people who and organizations who are falling through the cracks of the various schemes. So if you're PAYE or any of the other schemes, so at least 3 years of trading records, you're sort of in a lot better position in terms of being able to access those schemes. But there are loopholes, and there are people who essentially fall through the cracks. And the job very much now is making sure that Treasury, HMRC, other departments are aware of that and trying to plug those gaps where at all possible. Because, as you say, in your example, the supply chain is looking extremely anemic for the short term at least. So there does need to be that additional support there. And you make the point very well that it's not like you all haven't contributed significantly through your corporation tax, your income tax, national insurance, so on and so forth. So business rates as well. So this will cost the economy a significant amount. I think I saw a figure of about 350 billion earlier today. That is significant, but it does need to be directed to ensure that otherwise viable enterprises and organizations are, where at all possible, bridged over this period, so that we are in as much of a state and a semblance to pick up as best as possible when restrictions are removed in earnest.
Just one bit to add on that. I think the point that's being made by many is some parity with a self-employed income scheme, because if you're self-employed, generally sole trader with no employees but able to work and receive up to 80% of declared profit across the previous years, company directors of small SME limited company directors tend to be limited company directors because they employ people. And we've seen our staff furloughed and paid, but the actual directors who take that risk and make that contribution haven't actually received anything. And it's just looking really for some parity with the self-employed income scheme, which allows people to continue working. Whereas if a company director is furloughed, they can actually cover their director's duties, but they can't do anything to promote or work within the business. So I think, I take the point exactly. We're going to run out of money, and that's there's no question on that it can't be never ending. But it feels difficult for those that employ as directors, striking the most difficulty. And this obviously is my own case, but I've spoken to, working with Coaster Capital across the past 3 months, I've spoken to about 80 businesses, and any director dividend paid directors are really feeling the pinch and worried for their future. But I'll stop now and hand over to someone else. Thank you. But thank you for your support, Henry, as well, in communication.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. So, Alison, you've had your hand up for oh yes, wake up. She suddenly jerked into life then. Alison Addy from Gatwick Airport.
Well, you have to remember to get ready to unmute at the right time, don't you? So yes. Hello everybody, it's nice to see everybody, and hello Henry. You've already touched on the cross-party group, which is fantastic, the future of aviation group, and I don't want to let aviation dominate this discussion either, but actually one point, you've mentioned some of the priorities you're covering in that, so for example quarantine, and also the retention scheme. One of the points that I know that you've mentioned in the context of that group is the impact on tourism, and this is where I think it becomes more relevant in terms of the wider Gatwick Diamond business ecosystem of businesses, and really sort of what your thoughts are around that, and the sort of timescales for recovery for local the local visitor economy.
Absolutely. When I was talking earlier on about the sort of ripple out effect from the airlines and the airport essentially not being able to operate, tourism and travel is the immediate next one in line to face the difficulty before the sort of shock waves reverberate out into the rest of the economy. So a lot of what the Future of Aviation group is doing is also on behalf of the travel industry as well, because they are in many respects inextricably linked. And again, it's a very important sector for the Gatwick Diamond area economy. So those are very much areas that I'm also focusing on. I'm working with aviation. Strangely, aviation wasn't as well organized as the travel sector pre-pandemic. So aviation was, there were quite a few different sort of pressure groups within aviation, and indeed, you know, even between airlines, differences of opinion as to how the world should look. This pandemic has really thrown into sharp focus the need for cooperation, I think, amongst various different aviation sectors. Travel, I think, was much more cohesive as a lobby group, and they continue, and I do what I can to support them as well. They've got a slightly wider base as well, because, you know, if you're representing Gatwick or Heathrow or Manchester Airport, then aviation is really thrown into sharp relief and its fortunes. But the wider travel economy tends to have a broader base in Parliament, because if you're a Cornish MP, a Cumbrian MP, a Devonian MP, Welsh, you know, everyone's got quite a strong, London, everyone's got quite a strong sort of visitor economy section. So it tends to be, historically has been better represented than aviation, which has been more controversial because of issues over environmental, principally the environment, has meant that it perhaps hasn't had the, it's been taken for granted more than perhaps other industries.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, I've got a few questions building up in the sort of chat thing. I'm very happy to read them out, but is there anyone who'd like to ask their question rather than trust me to read it out? I can't see any hands. Right, so I'm going to ask one. I am going to name you. No such thing as anonymity. Question from Nick Broom of PVL. So what could business leaders do in the region, Gatwick Diamond business leaders, to back up the arguments for more support? So the arguments you're making for more support and reinvestment in our businesses in the Southeast. So what can we do effectively to back up the case that you're making to government?
I think hard evidence is always something that is very useful. You know, if you can show that X has led to Y, then that's something that is very tangible, that I then can go principally back to the Treasury, but other departments as well, and say, look, this is the reality. So hard evidence of the impacts is helpful, and I would encourage. You know, I'm happy to follow up on behalf of. We've got this sort of parliamentary protocol where we're not really supposed to sort of do things in other people's constituencies. So I would encourage those who are not located in Crawley to really be lobbying your local members of parliament as well, so that there's almost like a caucus from the Gatwick Diamond that is being heard in Westminster.
Okay, thanks, Henry. And And if you look on our website, the report I mentioned, the one we commissioned from Hatchery Generous, you'll see it's on there, and that will give you sort of helpful information that you can draw from in terms of the data. And it also starts to look ahead, actually, at some of what needs to be done in order to bring the economy back to where we want to get it to. Right, I can't see any hands, so I'm going to...
Sorry, can I just come back on that point, Jeff?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Solutions are important as well. So I'm very pleased to hear you say about, talking about what recovery and what the future looks like. So, solutions and future vision, I think, is a very important part of this, as well as just highlighting the challenges of the moment.
Yes, and that's what we're trying to do. We know there's a huge amount of analysis. We know that the LEP is going to do a massive amount of work as it reforms its industrial strategy into a recovery plan. But we're very much ready, and the report we commissioned is our sort of early contribution into that. But just a starter, though. Okay, Alan Smith from Everyone. We're doing a huge amount of communication now over the web and sort of session we're having now. And Alan is asking for assurance, really, that the government will put more drive into ensuring we have communication stability across the web and the mobile network services. I'm amazed at how well it stood up, to be honest with you, with all these Zoom meetings going on. But that's an issue I think we'd like to flag up with you, because it's so important in terms of how we do business now and in future.
Well, it's very starkly, I think, illustrated, just like the sort of collapse of aviation has been a reminder of how we've perhaps taken that for granted. Maybe we've taken for granted our mobile communications and the vitality of those for the future economy as well. And people talk about a new normal going forward, and the fact that we are able to meet remotely. Of course, we will get back to meeting in person, but I think a lot more meetings will take place, via Skype, Zoom, Teams, whatever. And I think that will change the way that we operate. And that really does mean that the robustness of the communications infrastructure that we have is absolutely vital, and it plays into all sorts of other sort of global economic and political issues, such as the future of 5G and Huawei and issues around that. And interestingly enough, just earlier this morning, I had a remote meeting with a big 5G company that's actually based here in Crawley. So it is very important that we get that right. Frankly, our communications network is not as strong as it could or should be, and we need to say that this has really thrown into sharp relief how we need to concentrate on that more.
Okay, Alan, did you want to come back on that, or you?
Yeah, thank you. That's good to hear. I mean, I've been a small producer of telecoms equipment for the best part of 30 years. And being a small British company, and my personal background doesn't have any real qualification, I've found it immensely difficult to break through red tape with common sense solutions. And I think this whole COVID scenario has created an air of more open-mindedness and more focus on UK limited. And I'd just like to see that driven forward and some of the red tape pulled down so that we don't go back into the slow snail pace of the past.
Absolutely right. I mean, ever since I've been a elected representative, the issue for business, almost the number one issue for business consistently over the 23 years that I've been elected in various forms, has been bureaucracy and red tape. That has been the thing that has held companies back, and particularly I think smaller enterprises as well, that are having to comply with bureaucracy and red tape that is really designed perhaps for larger corporations, but nevertheless you have to jump through many of those same hoops. So I think just generally in terms of efficiency, regulation is important. I'm a big fan of sunset clauses on regulation, because otherwise they just, red tape just builds up on itself. And if a regulation falls naturally and has to be actively renewed, if it's still of use, well, that is, I think, a better approach to that. I think we do have an opportunity to look at deregularizing the deregulation of the economy. Obviously, from the 31st of December, we will no longer be subject to necessarily. I mean, it's all being carried forward into UK law, but EU regulation won't necessarily apply. So there is a way that perhaps we can have regulation that's a little bit more tailored to the interests of the UK. So there are opportunities there, and again, this pandemic has highlighted that's an issue as well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Alan. What we are seeing is a greater pace of change. We're certainly seeing an acceleration of innovation. We're seeing businesses adapting in a way, perhaps doing things that they wanted to do anyway. And this whole, needs must, things are speeding up. I'm going to throw a difficult one in now. I don't think it'll be difficult for you, though, because you must be used to fielding it. But the question is, given all that's going on with COVID and the challenges we face, do we really need Brexit going on in parallel with it? So the suggestion in the question is, wouldn't it be better to at least to postpone Brexit so that we can focus on the matter of COVID and then perhaps come back to it at some point?
Well, and there's going to be a danger of me straying into politics here, and I know that there will be a division of opinion amongst the audience, as there has been ever since the whole issue of Brexit was first mooted before the referendum. So I'll tread carefully. I think most people know my views on this. But what I was interested, I never thought I'd hear myself quoting the CBI, but the CBI said, I think it was a Newsnight interview last night, I didn't see it myself, but I saw some comments on it this morning, that we actually now need to get on with this. Prolonging a transition period, I ultimately don't think is in anybody's interest. And coming back to the previous question of regulation, the danger if we extend the transition period beyond the 31st of December is that we are subject to EU regulation, but without a seat at the table to help shape it. And of course, we're also subject to the financial contributions going forward. 6 months ago, I appreciate this was pre-COVID-19. 6 months ago, this was the issue that was put to the country in a general election. There was, I think, quite a decisive message from people, not necessarily, people who were really keen on Brexit, but actually, I think the message of the election last December was, we now need to move on. And regardless of what you think of the decision that was made in 2016, it's been almost exactly 4 years since that decision was made, and we now need to move on. And I think there are opportunities for the UK to be more flexible in the way that it operates in terms of its laws, its regulations, its international relations. That's not to say that I don't think we should have an extremely close relationship with our European neighbours and partners, but I think this chapter does need to be concluded now.
Okay, thank you, Henry. I've got another question from Nick Broom of PVL. Excuse me. And Nick rightly comments on the importance of the entrepreneurial spirit for the recovery. We need to, as I said earlier, we need to adapt, and we need to adapt quickly. And innovation is going to be massively important. So Nick's question: is there anything more that can be done to help the bounce back driven by entrepreneurial spirit? And he specifically suggests or asks, how about reversing the cut to entrepreneurs' tax relief?
Yes, I'd be very, very favourable towards that. I welcome the fact for the IR35 regulations being delayed. I think they should be further reformed, and I think there are other parts of the entrepreneur economy when it comes to tax and regulation that could be liberalised. I'm naturally sort of a liberalising, lower tax individual. That's sort of my sort of political principles on these things. You know, others will have different opinions, obviously, but that is very much my instincts, and I think the way to go. One of the things you're right about, the entrepreneurial spirit. One of the things I've been really sort of heartened to see is businesses repurposing to meet and in very quick order, repurposing to meet the challenges and opportunities in this pandemic. So, you know, whether it be, you know, pubs now doing takeaway food deliveries, or a healthcare company in Manor Royal who repurposed to making ventilators. The way that lean entrepreneurial organizations have responded, I think bodes well for the future. And, you know, my view has always been that the government is there to provide light touch regulation and support, but to actually let the market get on with finding solutions to problems, because I think historically that has always been what has proved to be best for our society, both here and in other parts of the world. So it comes back to that earlier point that Alan was making on regulation again as well.
Nick, did you want to come back on that? I know your company has been responding.
Thank you, Jeff. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Henry. That's encouraging.
Sorry, can I say, Nick, thanks for putting that sign behind you, by the way.
It lives there.
The check is in the post. Yeah.
It hides all my scruffy clothes behind, you see.
Right.
No, we're genuinely very proud of that one, particularly. Yes, thank you, Henry. It is broader than just the entrepreneur's tax relief. I think we need to re-encourage that the regulation that was there, or rather the loophole that was there, was being abused by big businesses and abused by people making investments into companies. I'd like to see that sorted so that the genuine entrepreneurial people who are risking a lot bringing their businesses up, people like Jeremy who've put themselves in a position where unfortunately they can't now be supported through this period, just through doing what I would call the right thing and structuring their business as a limited company and putting a structure in place for future growth. I'd like to see how that can be really rewarded appropriately. Running a business over the last 25 years, I've noticed that most of the benefits of running a business have gradually been stripped away from us. Going back to the other point though, through this period, I did see it as an opportunity to try and pivot and help. We've turned our manufacturing equipment around and been producing visors for local care homes. The irony is, it's been really hard to give them away. It's been crazy trying to get through doors of places. There's so many procurement barriers in place. Even giving stuff away has been quite difficult. But that's been interesting just as a challenge in its own right. It's not an area we were supplying into. And ironically, because a lot of people have been on furlough, the funds you want to get hold of aren't around. So there's been some interesting challenges, but I think I've seen a lot of businesses repurpose their equipment, their people and their resources through this period for the genuine good. And that's been really encouraging.
No, I absolutely would echo what you're saying. And one of my slight concerns is that in the short term, with quite a few exceptions, aviation issue about directors, as Jeremy was bringing up, and others, entrepreneurs relief as well. With those exceptions, you know, the irony of this is big government has come to the rescue, but the danger is big government is not the solution to the longer term, and Again, I appreciate this might be a slight political point, and so I apologise if people have a different view, but I think government is there to intervene in a national crisis when it needs to. But the danger is that we don't have almost now a psychological reliance on government We need to detach ourselves from that at the earliest opportunity, I think, and have much more of an entrepreneurial spirit. That ultimately is what I believe will lead to economic growth again, because the kind of intervention that is taking place at the moment, it isn't sustainable. It will have to come to an end. Hopefully that's sooner rather than later. And the answer are the members of the Gatwick Diamond and business organisations up and down the country. You're the people who will recover the country, provide employment, provide profits and wealth, so that we can afford our public services. So, yeah, as I say, apologies if some people feel it's a bit of a political point, but I think, yeah, big government is the emergency position, but it can't be the long-term recovery position.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Nick wants to come back, I think.
Just the last point on that. No, I totally agree, and I think, and I might be putting myself out here a bit, the furlough scheme has been so blanket, and yet ironically not covered some that it probably should have, that I've seen many businesses not come out of furlough because it was easier to stay on it. And I think that's really quite sad. The quicker we can get the economy kicked back in, encourage businesses to start again. We have issues where we could supply, but certain members of our supply chain aren't active again yet, because it was easier to just lock everything down. And I'd love to see furloughing become segmented, so the real crucial bits like aviation, travel, tourism and so on are supported for longer, but other ones are actually stripped away from it quicker, and that the support is directed where it's needed. I realise in the time they had to make decisions very, very quickly, but I'd love to see that getting a bit more specialised and directed where it's appropriately needed.
I absolutely agree.
Okay, thank you. Anya, who's of course chair of Gatwick Diamond Business. Anya, do you mind if I invite you to pose your question yourself? It's on the nature of the recovery, I know.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Good morning, Henry. Good to see you again. As you know, I'm an environmental management consultant, but I think of the recovery much more than from an environmental point of view, but from a fair issue. So we're seeing the issues of Black Lives Matter this week, particularly with the things that are exploding in the United States. I really would like to understand what the government is doing to ensure this green and fair recovery. I know Alex Sharma was talking about it this week, and even Mr. Johnson as well. So what can the government do to really push these issues forward so that we don't just go back to the normal way of working and that we can build back better? And what can we as individuals and businesses do to support that?
Absolutely. The fact that, before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, the fact that the UK government, the first major industrial country in the world to give a commitment of net zero carbon by 2050, that is still very much what it was. It's the law. So that's what is still being worked towards. The COP conference has had to be postponed from this autumn to next year. But again, the UK is determined to lead on there being an environmentally sustainable future economy. And actually, coming back to the issue of innovation and entrepreneurship, the green economy is absolutely that, doing things in a more sustainable way and innovating in terms of technology. That is where I think Britain is best placed, again, as a small country, but as a global country, to really be part of economic recovery, not just over the next few years as we recover from this pandemic, but over the course of the rest of this half century and beyond. So I think it's absolutely key that we have a sustainable economic recovery, and it's World Environmental Day today, and it's important that we remind ourselves that kind of innovation is part of the future. And I've been accused of some sort of inconsistency, or even, dare I say, hypocrisy of my support for the aviation industry. I don't necessarily see them as counterintuitive, that supporting a sustainable environmental future doesn't go hand in hand with our connectivity going forward. A lot of innovation, again, I mentioned them earlier on, Virgin Atlantic, headquartered in Crawley, the first major airline to start using biofuel. So there are all sorts of solutions. EasyJet flying Airbus, which is a third more efficient in terms of fuel burn and noise pollution for that matter as well. So there is a sustainable way out of and into economic growth out of the situation we have at the moment, I think.
Thanks. Anya, did you want to come back? Or?
No, other than to say thank you for that. But
Alan, who we heard from earlier.
Jeff, just quickly, just to bring the point that it wasn't just environment. I was saying it's about social, it's about economic recovery, and that we do have an opportunity to look at our economic models to say that we can change. We have an opportunity to sit down and look at our own businesses, our supply chains, and how government and businesses and individuals are interacting. So better for the environment, better for people as well.
Anya, sorry, I apologise. I did miss the second part of your question. I represent a very diverse constituency, certainly the most diverse constituency in sort of Kent, Sussex, Surrey area. And one of the things I've always been very conscious of is that there being social justice and opportunity for all is in everybody's economic interest. The idea that you shut out talent from certain sections of the population is actually a harm to all of us. And one of the things I've tried to do over the years with some degrees of success, and I still continue to push on this, is we have some of the most deprived wards in the southeast in Crawley. And literally a mile away, we have world-class household name companies. And really sort of tying the two, the opportunity for young people from a lower socio-economic background to be able to access the opportunity of the sorts of world-leading companies that we have in this area is something that I'll continue to pursue. And just on the point of the George Floyd incident, it reminds me. I wasn't quite alive at the time, but it reminds me of the civil rights movement just over half a century ago, when Martin Luther King, to paraphrase him, talked about judging people by the content of their character. And that is absolutely, we should do that as a moral good, but we should do that for our economic self-interest as well.
Okay, thank you. Henry, we're running out of time. And there's a little series of 3 or 4 questions that I'll put to you quite quickly, and you can just note them if you feel that that's the best thing to do. Before I do, there's one specific thing I wanted to ask you, because it's very topical at the moment, and it's to do with the issue you raised earlier of quarantine for people returning into the country. In your constituency, of course, we have a very strong medtech sector, and we have one international. And you'll quickly, I think, you'll quickly know who this is, but we have one very major medtech company who currently is concerned because they can't send their engineers to install and maintain MRI machines because they can't get them back into the country. I would just like to leave that with you. I don't expect you to have an answer to that, but so far they do not appear to be covered by the exemptions. Sorry, you're muted, Henry.
I've just muted my.
You're
Sorry.
Right now. Yeah.
My understanding is they are covered by the regulations, but I will follow up on that. I know obviously what company you're referring to. I'll follow up on that and see if I can get a definitive answer. Okay,
that's great. So let me go back to the questions. Here's one from Nada. Do you think it's a good time for baby boomer business owners, to sell their businesses and retire? Oh.
I used to be a financial advisor, but I'm no longer licensed, so I can't give pensions advice. I think it's going to be very much on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. And Barry Hunt is really trying to get a feel for, you know, when are we going to be able to move on? When are we going to be on? When do you think we'll be on the sort of critical pandemic stage, and we can really start planning for the future? What's the sort of time scale on this?
I think a lot of further lockdown measures will be relaxed on the 1st of July or thereabouts. And I think certainly as we go into the autumn, I hope and pray we will be back to as much business as usual as possible.
Okay, that's great. And I wouldn't want to leave you on an easy one. So Nick has come back, and Nick is asking, what do you think the impact will be on the pandemic on housing, on the need to build huge numbers of housing within the region? Do you think it will have an impact, or is this just a sort of passing thing, and the underlying need for huge housing builds will still be there?
I think medium and longer term.
That was my addition to Nick's question, by the way, before Nick jumps in.
I think in the medium to longer term, housing demand will probably remain similar to pre-pandemic levels, but inevitably there's going to be a shorter term hit to the housing market and demand.
Right. I'm just checking. I think we're spot on time just about, so I think I'd like to wind up there. There is a message from Barry, but it's many thanks to Henry. And many thanks for a great session. So thanks for that. That's a very positive note to finish on. But I will, before I actually do wind it up completely, Henry, do you have any closing remarks, anything you'd like to expand a bit on, or something that hasn't come up that you thought might?
This has been a very useful session for me. There are a number of points that have really reiterated and emphasized what businesses have been telling me in recent weeks. So this is a very useful exercise. And thank you everyone for your very erudite and productive questions.
Okay, well, thank you. And there's a few questions at the end that I may have brushed over a little bit. So if any of you have anything that you'd really like us to follow up with Henry, please, I know Henry would be happy to hear directly from you, or come through us if you like. But I think that's been a really excellent and wide-ranging session. So now we have an electronic way of clapping hands, I understand. I've never mastered it. So I'm just going to go like that. But thank you, Henry. Right. Not many of you. I've got some thumbs up, and I have got some clapping hand signs. That's great. So cheers, Henry, thank you. And thanks to everybody else for taking part as well. See you again soon. You can go now.